you guys, it's another installment in my Halloween Eek Week series, my extra movie reviews that I'm doing the week of Halloween. And as Halloween gets closer and closer, I kind of felt like doing more, I don't know if necessarily like family friendly kind of stuff, but stuff that's more on the kind of fun end of, Halloween movies, stuff that I like to watch around Halloween when I was a kid and just as much nowadays. So by that token, here's a movie that I've been wanting to do. It's so weird because I could have sworn that Tom and I did a movie retrospective on this because I know that I had watched it fairly recently, like in the last year or two, and I thought that he had watched it with me, but then when I went back and checked our channel, our movie retrospectives, I couldn't find it. So either we did it and it got taken down and I didn't realize, or we thought about doing it and then we didn't do it. I don't know. It just seems really weird because I could have sworn that we did this one and I couldn't find it on there. So if we've already done it, whatever, fuck it. I'm doing it again. This is The Monster Squad from 1987. Now, the great thing, and I'm sure anybody that grew up in the 80s, or if you know anything about 80s movies, was that the 80s were kind of like the heyday of sort of ostensibly family friendly movies that were kind of like, horror movies, but that kids could watch also. I mean, I kind of went into that a little bit when I was talking about Something Wicked This Way Comes, which, was kind of like a Disney movie, but also had a lot of horror elements in it. Now, that one is kind of like a different vibe because that was kind of more a serious film, being an adaptation of, a Ray Bradbury dark fantasy story. This one, it seems like this one was trying to kind of cash in on the success of sort of more grown up kids fare, kind of like the Goonies and stuff like that, where it was a bunch of kids going on kind of a scary adventure, and the kids were more like realistic kids, they swore and they were kind of, they did naughty things and shit like that. So there was a lot of those kind of things. So when this came out, you could tell that it was kind of modeled after that, but then it kind of had a crossover with the, old Universal monsters, a monster movie, and wanted to do kind of like an old school, Monster Mash type of thing. But it seems like when this came out, it didn't really find an audience until later on. I think it really did quite badly at the box office, sadly, because it's almost kind of I guess audiences at the time, even though they were sort of more primed to, more primed for this kind of thing, where it's kind of like a horror movie, but it's kids. It just seemed like maybe this one was too much, because there's some stuff in this one that even by the very lax standards of the 80s was maybe going a little bit too far for back then. So it's maybe that's a possibility of why it never really caught on. But later on, when it came out on video and came out on cable, it seemed to kind of slowly find its audience, to an extent that, I mean, nowadays it's such a cult classic that, the main kid that was in it, after he grew up, he actually ended up making a documentary about it and about the fandom that kind of sprung out of it, in the interim, called Wolfman's Got Nards, which obviously is the most famous line from the film. It's just one of those ones that came out and it just wasn't appreciated at the time. And, but happily, as time went on, more and more people got it. And I kind of feel like kids that grew up in the 80s, this is kind of one that they remember really fondly from their childhood. Interestingly, I think I saw this one, it came out in 87, which means I would have been 15 when this came out. So this might have been a little bit aimed at kids slightly younger than I was, because I think the main kids in it are all kind of 12 years old. So I don't think that I saw this in the theater, although this seems like something that I would have gone to see, because I was into monsters and horror and stuff. But like I said, it was probably aimed a little too young for me, and it was just kind of a shame because I think I would have appreciated it a lot. But I'm pretty sure I saw it on cable later. I didn't see it as many times as that I saw the Goonies and things like that, and I always kind of felt I remember when I saw it back in the day, maybe in the late 80s, I ended up first seeing it. And I remember liking it, but it not making a huge impression. Like I said, maybe it was because I was a little bit older. And then when I watched it again, a few years back, I was kind of man, that was good, but there was something that was lacking about it. However, when I watched it again for this review, which, I just watched it earlier today, I was kind of man, that actually was way better than I remembered. It has flaws. It's not as good as the Goonies or anything like that, but there's really a lot of fun shit about it. And honestly, so the more times I see it, like the more I like it, the more I appreciate it. So basically, this was directed by Fred Decker, who had also done Night of the Creeps, which was, a more straight up horror movie. And he was also one of the writers on House, the 1986 one with William Catt, which I know we did a review of because I remember that. But and it also was co-written by Shane Black, who did the Lethal Weapon movies, among many, many, many other things. So, so there was that whole, so it had like a really good pedigree. Now, interestingly, this kind of got passed around to different producers. It ended up getting released by TriStar like in summer of 1987. And they wanted to do, like I said, kind of like your classic Monster Mash type of thing, like the Universal movies were doing back in the 1940s and stuff like that. And when they were starting to kind of go into like more comedy, I guess. But I guess they did a few serious Monster Mash ones. They did so many back then. But they wanted to do something like that. However, Universal would actually not give the filmmakers permission to use the Universal monster designs. So they had to just kind of I guess they had some legal department come in and you'd be like, well, you have to tweak it this percentage. So you can still tell that it's that monster, but you can't use the exact same designs. That said, I think they did a fucking great job with the monsters in this one. Stan Winston did the creature effects, so they're going to kick ass. And all of them look great. Particularly the Gill Man is a particular standout. It looks enough like the Universal Gill Man that obviously it's the Gill Man, but they changed it just enough to get away with it. And it looks so good. And honestly, I kind of wish the Gill Man had a bigger part because he's only in a couple of scenes. Dracula and Frankenstein's monster are kind of the big ones. And I guess the werewolf too. I kind of feel like the two that look the best, like the Mummy and the Gill Man, didn't get enough screen time. So that is kind of one complaint. But all of the monsters look good. All of the actors that play the monsters look great. So props to Stan Winston. All the monsters still look fantastic. Some of the other special effects, especially kind of the optical effects, there's kind of there's some matte type of stuff going on with a time portal and a vortex or something like that, and there's that looks kind of fake, kind of around the edges, when they do that matting or whatever, that looks kind of bad. And some of the bats look pretty fake and everything. But honestly, it's just kind of this movie, it's just supposed to be just a fun kind of kids movie, so you can forgive a lot of stuff. And I definitely forgive it, one, because it's fun, and two, because the monsters look awesome. So there's that whole thing too. Interestingly, I heard that, I'm not sure if this is entirely true, but I think that Fred Decker said that the original director's cut of the Monster Squad was actually 13 minutes longer, but for whatever reason, I guess the producers were like, no, this can't be longer than 90 minutes. So he cut a bunch out of it. So now it's super short. It's only an hour and 22 minutes long. I was amazed when I was watching it again. I'm like, holy crap. And it moves along really, really quickly. So I don't know how much of the stuff that was taken out kind of fills in some of the gaps. Because one of the main complaints that I've seen about this movie, even by people that love it and grew up with it, is that the story kind of isn't all that fleshed out. And there's a lot of plot holes, well, how did Van Helsing's diary get here? And how, the stuff about the amulet and the vortex and all this other kind of stuff isn't explained all that well. But like I said, it's not really, you don't really have to worry about it too much, because really kind of just the main thrust of the story is just a group of kids fighting a group of classic Universal-ish monsters, and that's really all you need to know about it. I mean, yes, there's kind of this complicated lore about why the monsters are here and, this thing that they have to find and all this other kind of stuff, but overall, it's not really something to be worried about. It's just a fun, family horror movie that you can put on. Although, like I said, I don't think I mean, obviously this would be fine for, kind of older kids or tweens and stuff like that. I don't know if I'd let like a little kid watch it because there's a lot of swearing and there's a lot of language in it that really is not super acceptable nowadays. So, but it does kind of like, it goes with the time. That's kind of how kids talk to each other in the 80s, so whether we like it or not. And that was kind of the way, us kids, when I was a kid in the 80s, that's how people talk to each other, and they called each other these terrible names that you would get in a lot more trouble nowadays than you would back then. Your mileage may vary if you want to show it to your kids or not. Like I said, there's a lot of swears. I'm like a 5-year-old girl calling someone a chicken shit, stuff like that, which I think is hilarious personally, but I don't have kids, so like I said, you're gonna have to use your own judgment on that over whether you want to watch it. And honestly, there is some stuff in that, like, people for real get killed in like terrible ways. There's a scene where the werewolf blows up into pieces, and so it's like pretty gory and kind of adult for a kids movie. But like I said, there was a lot of that going on in the 80s. Although this one, I feel like this is modeled after the Goonies, but it has a lot more stuff in it. It has a lot more swearing, it has a lot more gore, it has a lot more like scary shit, but it's funny too. So, you know what I mean? So if the Goonies is too scary for like a little kid, then this will for sure be too scary because, and too adult, because there's just way more stuff in here than what's going on in the Goonies. So what you have here, there's kind of like a little like thing before the credits roll. I guess 100 years prior to the events, the main events of the movie. So I'm guessing, let's see, it was 1887. So I guess you got Van Helsing and some other people, and they're trying to do this ritual where they're trying to they have this girl in there and she's saying some stuff in like another language, and there's this amulet that's kind of glowing, and so they're trying to do whatever it is, and then like all the monsters are attacking them, like all the vampire brides, and Dracula comes out and they all get their asses kicked, and then this big vortex opens up and they kind of get sucked into wherever it is. So then we jump ahead to present day, which like I said is 1987. And we are introduced to a group of mostly 12-year-old kids. I mean, the main kid, Sean, is played by Andre Gower, and he's the one that actually went on and did the documentary Wolfman's Got Nards later on. Sadly, the kid that plays Horace, or Fat Kid as he's generally known, he actually he gave up acting like after this when he got a little bit older and went to law school, but then he died at 22. I believe he died of pneumonia, so that was like a real shame. I actually hadn't known that when I watched the movie at first, but then I saw it when I looked it up, so I was like, that's pretty shitty. So yeah, it's just this group of kids, and this group of kids is really, really into monsters, classic monsters, new monsters. They just love, and they do kid things like boys do, and they just kind of have debates about what are the different ways to kill a werewolf and what would happen if you blew his head up or something like that. So, and all of that kind of factors into the movie later on when they actually do get attacked by actual monsters. So, but they're just having debates, but it's kind of like the kids in Stand By Me, you know what I mean? Where it's just kind of who would win a fight against Superman and whatever. So it's that kind of situation. So they're all into that. And there's also, cause they're kind of misfits, it's kind of like the Goonies. One of them has a younger sister named Phoebe, who's 5, who I think she's my favorite character. She's adorable. And she's kind of she likes monsters too, and she always kind of wants to tag along with them. But of course, they think she's just a baby, so they don't really want to hang out with her. And they also have this kid who's kind of older. His name is Rudy, and he's kind of like the kid that kind of has a motorcycle and a leather jacket, and he smokes. I don't think he's a motorcycle. It's like a bicycle, but he kind of rides it like a motorcycle. And he's in junior high, or middle school as they would call it nowadays. It's kind of interesting too, because I don't know, people that didn't grow up in the 80s, if you've seen a lot of movies from the 80s, there was this kind of 50s vibe to it, and there was kind of a 50s resurgence kind of happening in the 80s. Like, people were just into, like I said, early 80s, you had kind of like bands like the Stray Cats and stuff like that, where it was kind of like a rockabilly type of thing, and everybody had the big pompadours and stuff. So there was definitely that kind of thing going on, and I definitely do feel like there was kind of a 50s, because, they had Back to the Future and stuff like that, where everybody was going back to the 50s. So there was kind of like this resurgence of interest in the 50s in the 80s. So that's kind of what you get with Rudy, where he looks kind of like a 50s greaser. And for whatever reason, they don't really go into his backstory, but he starts hanging out with these misfit younger kids and sort of protects them from like bullies, because of course they get bullied because they're weird and they like monsters and stuff. So he kind of starts hanging out with them at their clubhouse. It might be because the clubhouse is right by like one of the kids' houses, and his hot older sister like sometimes undresses in front of the window without closing her blinds. So that might be why Rudy goes in there, because he does kind of look through. And that's another thing too, is there's some kind of questionable stuff that they probably wouldn't put in a movie nowadays, which is probably true of like a lot of 80s stuff. But, one particularly where he's like looking at the naked chick and then taking pictures of her. And then later they use that like he uses that as kind of blackmail a little bit. So, a little bit problematic, I'm just saying. But yeah, so there's that whole thing too. But so they kind of get together and hang out, read comic books and talk about monsters and everything like that. Meanwhile, the monsters from the past that Van Helsing had been fighting, they got sucked into this vortex or whatever, and for whatever reason got dumped in 1987, which was 100 years later. So it was kind of, like I said, it's kind of like the vortex isn't super explained. Like, is it a time portal? Is it like supposed to take the evil out of the world? They kind of explain it, but it doesn't really make any sense. But like I said, don't really worry about it. It's not important. It's just like a fun movie. So for whatever reason, there's like a plane, and it's like a World War II plane, and the two pilots are on it. And then they say to each other, they exposition to each other that is like they're carrying these coffins of like dead dudes to wherever. And so it turns out that one of them is Dracula. So Dracula kind of busts out, and one of the other ones is Frankenstein's monster. So he doesn't kill the pilots, but they do kind of like drop out the plane. Like Dracula turns into a bat or whatever and follows Frankenstein's monster's coffin down, and they kind of land in this swamp near this town where these kids live. This group of monsters, Dracula is like the leader, right? And then so there's other ones too. Frankenstein's monster, he kind of like revives him with lightning. And then there's also the Gill Man, who's already there for whatever reason, like he's already in the swamp. Then there's also the mummy, who actually comes to life. I guess he was in the museum, like the local museum, and he just like comes to life and walks off. And then there's also the Wolfman, who I can't remember, where did the Wolfman come from? I don't even remember where the Wolfman came from at this point. Like I said, it doesn't matter. They're just trying to like monster mash all of these monsters together so they can like, square off against the kids or whatever. So obviously the first thing that happens, like all this weird shit starts happening. Like the Wolfman, who is still in his man form, actually goes to the police station and tells them, you guys need to lock me up because I'm a werewolf and it's the full moon and I'm gonna fuck everybody up and everything. But of course they do not believe him. They just think he's crazy. And one of the kids, their dad is a cop. So the cop is just sitting there like, I'm too old for this shit. It's like, why? Like, what the fuck is going on? Like a dude's coming in saying he's like a werewolf and all this other kind of crazy crap going on. Another thing that happens too is Sean, like the main kid, his mom finds this book, like knows he's into monsters. And so she finds this book ostensibly at a garage sale. And it's like, oh, they had a garage sale from that like old creepy mansion or whatever. And she brings this book, which was written by Van Helsing. And he is really excited about it. But then he's like, well, wait, it's all in German and he can't read it. So they first try to get the older sister to read it because she takes German, but of course she's a ditzy dumbass and like she doesn't know how to read it. So then they have to approach who they call, I think they ever even give this guy a name. He's just known as Scary German Guy. And he lives in the neighborhood and he's always kind of like peeking out the window at like the kids walking by, and they just think he's creepy and weird because he's like a weird foreigner or whatever. So they're kind of scared to go there, but they're like, well, look, we really need this book translated. so we can see what's going on, because by this point they've started to like suspect that there's monsters. So they finally go to Scary German Guy's house to ask him to translate the book, and it turns out that Scary German Guy is a lovely, lovely man. He translates the book for them. So it's through this book that you get the backstory about this amulet, which supposedly is, I think it's like concentrated good, and it's supposed to like keep all the forces of evil away and keep the monsters away. However, there's like a little loophole that every 100 years, if like the evil kind of gets hold of the amulet, they can break it, and then like all the evil forces, you know, the monsters, can take over, and like it'll tip the balance of the world toward the evil side. So to prevent that from happening, there's kind of like another loophole where you can get a virgin, but it has to be a female virgin. I don't think they say that in the book, but in the movie, they always talk about we need to find a virgin, but it's always a girl, because I'm kind of like, well, I'm sure like those 12-year-old boys are all virgins too. Like, couldn't they do it? But no, it has to be a girl. I don't remember if it says specifically that it had to be a girl virgin, but it does. Because virginity only matters if it's a girl, I guess. I don't know. It's really weird. But there was a lot of that in the 80s now that I'm thinking about it. It was just when they said virgin, it's kind of like they almost went, well, maybe no, I guess not, because there was also that really funny vampire comedy with very young Jim Carrey in it. I think Lauren Hutton was in it too, called Once Bitten. And she, I guess because she was a female vampire, she was looking for a male virgin. So yeah, so there was male virgins in movies too. I'm just like, you know, I'm just talking out my ass apparently. But yeah, so it has to be a girl virgin. So a girl virgin has to like say this spell, which will open the portal up again, and they'll like suck all the monsters into it, and either take them into limbo. I think they do say that it takes them into limbo, or just pushes them ahead another 100 years and makes them somebody else's problem. I'm not really sure what the end game is, but like I said, it's not super important. So that all of that is established. It's also established too that even though Dracula is the head of the monsters, and Mummy seems to be on his team, Gill Man seems to be on his team, Wolfman is on his team, but only when he's in wolf mode. When he's a man, he's almost kind of like, fuck this shit. I mean, you know, with that, which makes sense. And Frankenstein's monster, he kind of seems like he's in it, but he's kind of real passive and submissive and everything, and Dracula like keeps him in a dungeon and is mean to him. So there's one great scene where Phoebe, the little 5-year-old girl, it's you know, very much like the original Frankenstein movie, where she's kind of sitting by a lake and like pulling flowers out of the thing, and Frankenstein's monster like approaches her. And then so it turns out that Phoebe like befriends Frankenstein. It's like, no, he's nice, and he's like his friend of ours. So now like all the kids start hanging out with Frankenstein's monster. And because Frankenstein's monster, you know, calls Dracula master and everything like that, so he's able to kind of like help the kids figure out where Dracula is. Because Dracula is not only trying to get the amulet, but so he can destroy it, but he's also trying to get Van Helsing's diary for some reason, so he can like figure something out, or how to destroy the amulet or something like that. Like I said, it's not super important. They do say it in the movie, but it's not that big a deal. So it goes on where basically, so the kids are trying to like fight the monsters, and the monsters are trying to like kill the kids and get the amulet and the book away from them, and it's like this big confrontation toward the end. Now, as I said, this movie has a lot of stuff in it that I really think was, even for the 80s, was kind of like, okay, because there's one point, like I said, where the werewolf, he is like the cop guy, like the dad of one of the kids, like puts some dynamite or a grenade or some shit like that, like down the front of his pants, and then like pushes him out a window, and the werewolf like legitimately like explodes, and like you see like arms and head and everything like that, like, but like, you know, blowing up, and like blood and gore and stuff. And so then like he's laying down in pieces on the ground, and he does kind of come back together, because that was kind of one of the things that they were discussing earlier on in the movie, was that, well, you know, how many ways are there to kill a werewolf? Because they were doing the test for the older kid to see if he could be in the monster club. And he said, well, silver bullet, and then they couldn't think of any more. So that was kind of like, so they blew him up, and then like all of his pieces came back together, and he like regenerated. So then at the end they were just kind of like, oh, I guess silver bullet is the only way, because you can blow him up and he still like came back to life. So there was that whole issue too. There's also a very creepy scene. Well, because at first they get one of the boys' hot older sisters, because she tells them that she's a virgin, so they are trying to get her to complete the ritual, you know what I mean? So all the monsters are kind of like, coming in on them and everything, and she can't read German, obviously, so she's having like scary German guy like help her try to read it out of this book, but of course she's like an idiot, so she's like, I can't say that, like speak English, blah blah blah, because she's like a ditz, and so she can't do it, and then but finally she does it, and then like nothing happens, and then they're like, wait, you're not really a virgin, are you? And she's like, yeah, but well, Steve, but he doesn't count, and they're just like, fuck this. And then at this point, and I think like modern audiences might think this is very, very strange, but at this point, like Phoebe, the 5-year-old girl, is there, and they're like, well, she's a virgin, right? I'm like, well, I would hope so, for Christ's sake. How dark would that be if they like had the 5-year-old girl like read the thing? They're like, oh my God, she's not a virgin either. That would be terrible. But yeah, so that's a little weird. Like thinking of a 5-year-old girl as like thinking of her in those terms. Like I said, I don't think they would do that in a movie nowadays, but yeah, but they did it back then. And also there's a scene, like I said, I think even audiences back then were just kind of like, whoa, that was a little far, where Dracula is going to kill Phoebe because she's there like trying to open the vortex, and she has the amulet in her hand, and Dracula legit like picks her up by the face, like picks her up like that, and screams right in her face, give me the amulet, you bitch. This is a little 5-year-old girl. Dracula calls a 5-year-old girl a bitch. This is probably like the only movie in history where that happens, but it happens in this movie. But I mean, despite all of that, despite the shit that's in this, it's just, and like I said, the swearing, I mean, the kids are just like always like swearing, and they're just calling each other all of these horrible slurs and stuff like that no one would use, that you wouldn't see in a movie nowadays. But it's like, for whatever reason, I guess because it was the 80s and the movie was fun and like well-intentioned, and it's just, so it works. And even though, I don't know, so I just kind of feel like it fell into this, when it first came out, at least, it fell into this thing where it was a little too adult for the kids that it was aiming for. Because like I said, I'm imagining they were going for like a tween demographic, because that's how old most of the kids were in the movie. They were around 12. So I imagine they were going for that demographic, but maybe parents thought the movie was a little bit too old for them. But then like older teenagers, it was probably like a little too kid movie for them. Because like I said, I was 15 when this came out, and it seemed like, I mean, I probably would have seen it anyway, but it seemed a little bit like a kid's movie at that point, which it is, but it has like some pretty adult shit in it. And I had forgotten another thing too. I'm pretty sure, like I was watching this morning, two of the cops, like one of the cops is, one of the kids' dads, right? Like Sean's dad is a cop, and his partner, who like the interactions between Sean's dad, the cop, and his partner are hilarious. Like I love the back and forth between. There's only like a couple scenes of it, but it's just like really, really funny. And later on, I'm pretty sure, because I was like, did I just see that? I'm pretty sure that like Sean's dad, the cop, gets out of the car and his partner is still in the car, and then like Dracula blows the car up, and I'm like, wait, did that dude just die? Like, did he just get blown up and like burned alive? I'm pretty sure he did. And like, cause they don't like see him afterward. And I'm just like, holy shit, I can't believe they fucking, so they kill a lot of people in this. And there's a thing too where Rudy, the greaser kid, he, he's got this, like he fucking straight up shoots the werewolf, like with the silver, he steals a gun from a cop or whatever, that's knocked out, and he had made silver bullets in his high school shop class, and he puts the silver bullets in there and straight up shoots the werewolf, and then the werewolf turns back into a guy and is like, thank you. So you know what I mean, so it makes it good. But he also straight up like stakes a bunch of vampires' brides, like just like right in the thing. So so it's a little intense for a kids movie, and I think maybe that's why, like I said, nowadays people watch it and it's not offensive nowadays really, but I kind of feel like back then it didn't really know what its audience was exactly, because it just went pretty far in like a horror and violence sort of direction, and in like an adult language and stuff like that, maybe like went a little bit older than the audience that it was aiming at. But just like a lot of things that came out that didn't really find their audience at the time that it came out, maybe 1987 wasn't the time for this, maybe if they'd waited a couple years. But I like that movies like this that are really kind of like a product of their time, but they're also kind of like ahead of their time a little bit. So I kind of like that over the years, like after it was on cable and after it came out on VHS and after like people started to see it, people started remembering it fondly. So it got this massive, massive cult following to the point, like I said, now where there's documentaries about it, you know, called, like I said, Wolfman's Got Nards. I've seen t-shirts that say Wolfman's Got Nards on it that have like quotes from the movie and shit like that. And I was watching Cinemassacre. They did like this big long panel discussion about it. And it's funny because one of them actually didn't see it back in the old days. They're like, they didn't have any, you know, nostalgic sort of thing for it. And he was kind of like, well, he didn't really think it worked because a lot of the plot was like not explained and everything seemed to happen really quickly and stuff. But he was acknowledging like how great the makeup effects were, like the monsters and stuff. But he didn't get into it as much. Honestly, though, it's like I saw it back in the day, but it wasn't one that really stuck with me. But the more times I see it, the more I like it. I think like the more I appreciate it, the older I get. Because like I said, I kind of feel like I watched it a couple years ago and I remember liking it, but being like, well, it seemed like a lot of stuff happened or a lot of stuff wasn't explained. And, you know, there wasn't, I don't know, it didn't seem like some of the plot points didn't seem to connect all that well. But then when I watched it again earlier, I was kind of like, oh, you know what? It's like, this is just like it's just a fun movie. And honestly, like a lot of the lines in it like made me laugh a lot more, I think, than they did the first time I saw it. Because I was like, oh man, I forgot how funny this was. And man, I forgot how good that mummy looked. And that great scene where the mummy's trying to like, you know, grab onto the back of their car and like the greaser kid like has the what do you call those things, the bow and arrow, and he gets one of the bandages like in the arrow and like unravels the mummy, and it's like all of the bandages unravel, and then he's just like this little ancient looking skull, and it looks so great. That fucking Gill Man looks great. All the monsters look fantastic, and the dude that plays Dracula is also great. He's just like really, really scary and really menacing, and it's just one of the best Draculas, honestly, and I kind of feel like he doesn't get a lot of love for it. But yeah, I mean, well, you know, like I said, should you let like little kids watch this for Halloween? No, probably not, because like I said, there's a lot of swearing and there's a lot of really scary stuff in it. You know, that's probably more adult than a kid should be watching. But you know, kids that are, like I said, tweens, I don't think they'd have a problem watching this. Maybe it would be weird. I would be interested to see how a modern 12-year-old would take this movie, because it is, you know, it is very 80s, but I don't know. I'd be curious. So if any of y'all have any like 12-year-old kids and you want to show them this movie this Halloween and see what they say about it, I'm genuinely curious, because it's hard for me to judge, because, you know, I don't have any kids and I don't know any 12-year-olds nowadays, so I don't really know like what the difference would be, but I'm curious to know anyway. Now, interestingly, when I first planned to do this movie for my Halloween week, it was on Hulu, but then when I went and looked this morning, it's not there anymore. So I actually had to rent it on YouTube. So know that going. If you have Hulu, it was on there up to like a week ago, but now it's gone. So, but you can rent it on YouTube. I think it was $3.99. So, you know, it's a good, it's not really necessarily set around Halloween, but, you know, because it's monsters and shit like that, it seems like a very Halloween-y type movie to me. So I really wanted to do it for this. And like I said, I could have sworn that we did it before, but I guess we didn't. I mean, unless it got taken down. I really don't remember. But yeah, so if any of you guys saw this, either when you were a kid or you saw it recently, I'd be interested to hear everybody's kind of thoughts on it. You know, so let me know down in the comments what you thought of the Monster Squad, and I will see you on the next review. Bye.